Masechet Baba Batra Daf Nun Chet. Yesterday we saw a law by Rabbi Benaa, a late Tana, regarding shared use of a courtyard, that the partners in the courtyard have to let the other use the courtyard for doing laundry, because it's not modest for Jewish women to have to go and do the laundry by the river or in public. And then we followed up with a statement that if one is passing by women that are doing laundry, one should avert his eyes in order not to see them. Now we're going to see, then we saw some other laws of Rabbi Benaa about proper behavior of Talmid Chacham in the way he sets up his table, and that he doesn't put clutter under his bed. And now we're going to see another few stories that are cryptic and probably allegorical also about Rabbi Benaa. Rabbi Benaa, hava kamesayen me'arta, ki meta le'me'arta d'Abraham, ashkeche li Eliezer ebed Abraham deka'eh kameh baba. So Rabbi Benaa, he wanted to mark burial caves on top of the ground so that people would know that there is tum'ah under the ground here, and then if they are kohanim or there are people that are making sure to be tahor, they will not walk in that area. That's one of the primary reasons that we put grave markers, so that people know that there is tum'ah there. And so one of the graves he wanted to mark was Me'arat HaMachpelah. And so he goes to the cave where Abraham is buried, Me'arat HaMachpelah, and he wanted to go inside so that he can see the dimensions under the ground, so that he can make markers above the ground. Now, he wasn't able to go in because Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, was standing guard at the door and would not let anybody in. Amar le, mai ka'abid Abraham, amar le, gane bichnafah de Sarah, veka me'ayena le bereshe. So Rabbi Benaa asks Eliezer, what is Abraham doing all day? And he said he's lying in the arms of Sarah, and she is examining his head, meaning they're in some kind of romantic pose, which would seem to make it inappropriate for anybody to go in at that time. Amar le zil emale Benaa ka'e ababa. But Rabbi Benaa was a little pushy, and he says, go tell him that Benaa is standing at the entrance and would like to come in. Amar le le'ol medayedi adeyeser b'hai alma leka ayil ayin unfak. And so Abraham said, okay, let him come in, because it is known that there is no yeser hara here in this world, the world of the dead. There's no desire, and therefore it's okay. There's no problem of immodesty. Let him come. And so he did. He went in and he examined the cave and measured it, and then he went out. Ki meta le'marta da'adam harishon yasta bat kol ve'amra nistakalta bidmuti yokani bidukani asma al tistakel. But me'arat ha'machpelah, as we'll see in a second, called that like kaful. It's a doubled cave. There are two chambers, and so Abraham was in one, but Adam Harishon also is buried there, but in a separate chamber. And so Rabbi Benaa wanted to measure the chamber where Adam Harishon is to see its dimension, so he could make a marker above ground where it is. However, a divine voice emerged and said, you looked at the likeness of my image itself you are not allowed to look at. In other words, Adam Harishon is created b'tzalmo kidmuto, in the image of God itself directly, whereas Abraham is only the image of an image. So that was bad enough that you went in and saw Abraham. To go into Adam, you are not allowed to go. But Rabbi Benaa says, no, I have a need to, because I have to measure the dimensions of the cave so I can mark it off. And the answer was, Kimidat achisona kach midat penimit, ulman dama shenebatim, zo lema'ala mizo, kimidat elyona kach midat hatachtona. The answer was, it's the same dimensions as the one of Abraham. The outside chamber is the same size as the inner chamber, and this would be according to the opinion that the two chambers are side by side. One is more inside and one is more outside. So you already measured the measurement of the outside one where Abraham was. And so since you know what that one is, so just double it, and then you'll know how big the small one is, the inner one is. same size, and then you can mark it on top without having to go in. Now there is another opinion that says this doubled cave of Batra Bachpelah is not side by side, 2 chambers, but rather one above the other, 2 stories. And according to that also, it's the same thing, since they are the same dimensions and one on top of each other, so then you know exactly what it is and where it is, and you can mark it appropriately. So actually there's no need to go in. Amar Rabbi Benaa nistakalti b'shnei akebav v'domim l'shnei galgalei hama. Rabbi Benaa says, I looked at Adam's 2 heels, and they were like 2 suns. They were so beautiful and glowing and radiant that's what they looked like. So this is very interesting. I think we see a theme throughout Rabbi Benaa's statements. You see, Rabbi Benaa did not have to go into the cave where Adam Harishon was, because the Bat Kol just told him how big the dimensions were. But it looks like he peeked in anyway, and although he didn't see the face, the full glory of his image, but still peeked in enough to see his heels, even though he had no need to. And so this seems to relate to going into the cave of Avraham, where Avraham is in some kind of romantic position with Sarah, and he has to get special permission. Okay, fine, there is no yesed there, and that relates back to what his previous statements about proper etiquette, of a Tamid Chacham, and what's under his bed and what's on his table, and all the way back to his statement about being modest regarding women doing laundry. So they have a common theme of modesty, but not only about regarding modesty of women's dress, but also and behavior, but also here regarding modesty in not peering into Shekhinah, where one is not permitted to peer. It's too intrusive, asking too many questions, trying to understand things that human beings are limited in their understanding. So this is a very interesting and still very cryptic and strange a series of stories, but I think there's a lot of depth here, and it requires a lot more further study. Okay, we're not done yet, and we'll see some of the same themes coming up again. While we're on the topic of the beauty and radiance of Adam Harishon, and not just his face, which you cannot see at all, but even his ankles, so now we compare the beauty of some various biblical figures. Hakol bifnei Sarah kekof bifnei Adam. All human beings in their beauty are like Sarah, Imenu, the wife of Abraham that we just mentioned, as a monkey is to a human being. In other words, a monkey is to a human as humans are to Sarah. And furthermore, Sarah bifnei Chava kekof bifnei Adam. Sarah compared to Chava would look like a monkey compared to a human. Chava bifnei Adam kekof bifnei Adam. Adam bifnei Shekhinah kekof bifnei Adam. And Chava compared to Adam Harishon is like a monkey compared to a person, and a human being compared to the Shekhinah is also like a monkey compared to a person. So obviously this is not at all literal, since Shekhinah has no physical countenance, but rather is talking about some kind of spiritual level or height. Shufre derav kahana me'ayin shufre derav. And now more about comparative beauty, that the beauty of Rav Kahana is only a semblance of the beauty of Rav. Shufre derav me'ayin shufra de Rabbi Abhu. And the beauty of Rav is only a semblance of that of Rabbi Abhu. Shufre de Rabbi Abhu me'ayin shufre de Yaakov Abinu. Shufre de Yaakov Abinu me'ayin shufre de Adam Harishon. And the beauty of Rabbi Abhu is only a semblance of that of Yaakov, and that of Yaakov Abinu is only a semblance of that of Adam Harishon. Since we talked about burial caves, now we have a fascinating story about burial. Hahu amgusha dahava chatit shachbe ki metab me'arta derav tuvi bar matana tafse bedikne. There was a certain Zoroastrian priest who was a Zoroastrian priest who was digging up the graves of the dead. The reason they were doing that is because of Zoroastrian belief that the earth is holy, and they would not bury their dead. Dead are tameh, impure also in Zoroastrian ritual law, and they would not allow dead to be buried in the ground because it makes the ground impure. The Zoroastrians instead would leave their dead out for the birds to come and eat. According to them, that was the most respectful way to deal with their dead. We obviously would think that that's the worst possible way for someone to be left. So they were offended by people burying their dead, and therefore he was exhuming bodies. When he came to the burial cave of Rav Tovi bar Matana, Rav Tovi bar Matana grabbed the beard of this Zoroastrian priest. He was dead, but he was able to get up and grab his beard to not let him do that. Ata Abaye Amarle b'matuta minach shabke. So Abaye came to intervene to help out this poor Zoroastrian priest who was being held by a skeleton by his beard. And so Abaye pleaded with Rav Tovi and said, please let him go. And he did. Rav Tovi let him go. And so then he went back and was buried in the ground. But this Zoroastrian priest kept coming, and he came the next year again to dig up the body of Rav Tuvi, and again Rav Tuvi grabbed the Zoroastrian priest by his beard. And this time, even though Abaye pleaded with Rav Tuvi to let him go, he would not let him go until Abaye had to bring scissors and cut the beard of the Zoroastrian priest so that he can go, and so that shows him not to come back again the next year. And now we have yet another story about Rabbi Benaa. Hahu de'amar lehu, chabita de'afra lechad berai, chabita de'gadme lechad berai, chabita de'udra lechad berai, la havayadu mai ka'amar lehu. There was a certain man that before he died, he gave instructions as to his inheritance. And he says, a barrel of earth should be to one of my sons, and a barrel of bones to one of my sons, and a barrel of wool to one of my sons. And they didn't know what he was talking about. What barrel of bones, barrel of wool? And so he died, and now they had to split up the inheritance, but they could not understand these instructions. Atu lekamed Rabbi Benaa. And so the brothers came to Rabbi Benaa to help adjudicate and figure out what this means. And Rabbi Benaa was very wise, and he explained it. Amar lehu, itlechu ar'a amru le'in, itlechu chevata in, itlehu bistarke in, yachi hachi ka'amar lechu. And so Rabbi Benaa says, do you have land? And did your father leave land in the inheritance? And they said yes. So that is the barrel of earth. So when he was talking about earth, he wasn't talking about literally a barrel of earth, but he was talking about the land, which is earth. And he says, do you have animals that he left as inheritance? They said, yes. Well, that would be the barrel of bones, because animals have bones. That's what he was referring to. And do you have quilts? And he said, yes, there are quilts in the inheritance. Oh, so when he said a barrel of tufts of wool, that's what he was referring to the quilts, and so that son gets all the quilts. It seems that the father did not want to publicize that he had all this wealth, and so he said it in a secret way, and he only hinted to it, and then because of Rabbi Benaa's help, they were able to figure it out. Yet another story about Rabbi Benaa and his brilliance and wisdom. Hahu gabra de shama'a debitu deka amra librata amai la siniat be'isura. So a husband overheard his wife saying to their daughter the following advice: why are you not more modest when you sin? In other words, this daughter was involved in illicit relations, and the mother, rather than saying stop doing that, is saying, well, at least do it in secret so people don't know. Why aren't you being more modest about these prohibited relations? And she explains that she knows because of her own behavior. She says, this woman. She's referring to herself. This is the mother of this daughter, the wife of this guy who's overhearing. He says, this woman, me, I have 10 sons, and only one is from their father. In other words, she has only one legitimate child. The other 9 are from illicit relations. And you see, nobody knows because she is secret about her prohibited activity, and so that's what she's telling her daughter. Now, the husband overhears this, and I guess he doesn't say anything while he's alive. It would be too embarrassing. What is he going to do? But he does want to do something about his inheritance. So when he died, he says, I want all my property to go to one son. He didn't specify which one because the father himself doesn't know which of his sons is really his. but he doesn't want the illegitimate sons to be able to inherit any of his property, so he said only one son. Now, they didn't know which one he intended, the brothers themselves. Weren't sure. Atule kamed Rabbi Benaa amar lehu zilu chabotu kibra de abuchon ad de kae umegale lechu lehe minaichu shebaka. And so they came to Rabbi Benaa to ask for his help to be a judge. And he said, here's I have an idea. Go and bang on your father's grave until he reveals to you which of you, to which of you he left it. Not clear how the father's going to answer. Is he going to knock back? Is he going to shake? Do something? But just go and bang on his grave until he gives each one an answer. Azu kulehu kulehu hahu debre hava la azal. So each of the sons went and banged on the grave. Didn't get an answer. However, that son, who was the legitimate son, would not go. He felt it was not respectful to go and bang and shake his father's grave. So he didn't go at all. Amar lehu kulehu nichse tehai. And Rabbi Benaa was able to figure out, all of the property should go to that brother. It's clear that he is the legitimate son because he has respect for his father. The other sons don't have respect, and obviously, therefore, they are the illegitimate ones. This is like a King Solomon type of solution, able to see who cares the most from their behavior. Azlu achlu kursa be malka. So the judge says this son gets all of them. The other 9 are really upset about this. And so the other 9, they go to the king and they slander Rabbi Benaa to the king. And they say, Amri ika gabrachad bihudae tekama pikma moname enashe bela sehde belamidi aituhu chabshuhu. They said there is a certain individual among the Jewish people, and he removes money from people without any witnesses, without any evidence at all. So now this is under the Roman government, and the Romans allowed the Jews some semi-autonomy that they can run their own situations and have their own courts. But if they're doing a bad job and the rabbis are mistreating people or stealing, then the Romans are going to come and get involved. And so therefore, based on this slander, they said, who is this rabbinic judge here who's taking people's money without any proper procedure? We don't want this happening. And so they took Rabbi Benaa and they put him in jail. Azla debitu amra lehu. Now the wife of Rabbi Benaa, interesting, we don't have that many stories about wives and the wife of a say, so she comes to the rescue. Abda chad hava li פסקו לרשע, ופשטו למשחה, ואכלו בשרה, וקמלו במיה ומשקו לחבריה, ולה קיה היבי לי דמה, ולה אגרה. So this wife, she also is very wise, and she uses a very roundabout way of getting her husband out of jail. She tells the following very strange story to the guards, and she says, I had a slave. And some people came and they cut off his head and they skinned him and they ate his flesh and they filled him with water and they served their friends water to drink from his skin. And they did not pay me, they did not rent him out. And I'm really upset because they owe me money. Now, this seems like some kind of horrific story. What kind of people do this to a human being? That's what they thought. So the guards didn't know what she was talking about, and so they were trying to figure it out. So they said, let's bring that wise Jew, and he'll say so. Of course, they did imprison him, but they recognized that he was very wise and he was able to figure out riddles. This was her plan all along, to tell them some strange riddle, and so that they would have to find that wise Jew to figure it out, and that's how she gets him out of jail. So they bring him out. Karihu Rabbi Benaa amar lehu zarnuka amra lehu amriho il v'chakim kulehai leteb ababa v'nidon dina. And so they bring him out of jail, and he says they're talking about a water skin. The Avdah was not a human slave, but rather a goat that served this woman. So Avdah doesn't have to mean a slave. It just means a worker. So this was a goat that was doing work for her, and some people came and they slaughtered this goat and skinned it, which is the normal thing you do after you slaughter a goat, and they ate it because that was a meal. That's a normal thing to do. And they took the skin and they made a pouch out of it, a water skin, which is also very normal. So this is all normal things to do. And her complaint is that they did not pay me for it, that's all. And so he was able to figure out this cryptic message. She made it cryptic on purpose so that they would call her husband out of jail. And then they realized just how smart he was, and said, since he's so smart, let him sit at the gate where the judges are, and he can render judgment. So they put him at the gate of the Roman court to go and make judgments there. Now we have more stories about him at the gate. He saw that it's written upon the gate, Kol dayan demitkere ledin la shemeh dayan. Any judge that's summoned to judgment cannot be a judge because he's suspect. The judge has to be beyond reproach, totally honest, and if he has any suspicion, then he's not valid to be a judge. That was on the Roman court. But Rabbi Benaa saw this and says, it doesn't make sense. If anybody comes from anywhere in the world and just summons the judge to judgment, even if it's a false allegation, just a total nonsense, still you're going to disqualify the judge. Even if later on he turns out to be acquitted. So this is not fair. It's not a good system. But rather, the Rabbi Benaa says, what you should write is, any judge that's called to judgment and money is lawfully taken from him. He's found to be guilty and he has to pay someone money. If he's guilty, then he should not be a judge. But only if he's found guilty, not just for being summoned. כתבו הכי, ברם סבד יהודה אמרי, כל דיין דמתקרא לדין ומפקין מיני ממונה בדין, לאו שמא דיין. And so they amended their sign, they added to it, they didn't erase what was there before, so they left what was there, and they said, however, the elder of the Jews says, any judge who is called to judgment and money is taken away from him because he stole or didn't pay someone, that person cannot be a judge. They accepted, right, his correction. And one more sign that he changes. Chazad dichtiv. Berosh kol mota ana dam. Berosh kol chayin ana chamar. The sign says, the head of all death am I, blood. In other words, excess blood is the primary cause for people to die. And it's kind of written as a riddle. And at the head of all life is I. And what is that? Wine. Wine is what gives life. They would drink wine, not just like today for social reasons, but that was their main drink because water had germs in it, and so they knew that if they mixed a little wine in it, then that was healthier. So it was good. They drank wine pretty much at every meal. So Rabbi Benaa says this sign is not correct because according to this, if someone falls from a roof and dies, or falls off from a palm tree and dies, was that the excess blood that kills him? No, it's because of the blow of the fall that kills him. So it's not true that everybody dies from excess blood. And furthermore, if someone is about to die and you give him wine, you think, is he going to live? It's true. Wine keeps a person healthy, is good, it has good medicinal effect. Even if someone's a little sick, it'll get them better. However, it's not going to bring them back to life if they're almost dead. Rather, Rabbi Benaa says you should amend the statement and you should write as follows. At the head of all illness am I, and that's excess blood. Excess blood causes illness. It's not the cause of all death because it's traumatic death of falling off a roof. But of all illness is an imbalance of the fluids, and so imbalance in the amount of blood. And at the head of all healing am I, wine. It can bring healing. It's not going to save someone from dying if they're about to die, but it has medicinal effect. So that's a better way to write it. And so they did. Ketavu hachi beram sabi dihuda'e amri berosh kol mar'in ana dam berosh kol avsan ana chamar. So they added to what they left what they had before, and they said, however, the elder of the Jews said as follows, The head of all illness am I, which is blood, and the head of all medicine am I, healing am I, and that is wine. And by the way, if you don't have wine in a certain place, then there are other herbs that you can use as medicines. And lastly, ketiv apitcha de kapot keya, anpak, anbag, antal. Vezu antal, zehu rebi'it shel Torah. Since we're talking about things that are in at the entrance of cities, at the entrance of the city of Kapotkiya, it was written these three words, Anpak, Anbag, Antal. And what is that? What is Antal? It's a certain measurement. It's a revi'it that we have all the time, revi'it, a quarter of a log. And it's telling us that these words, Anpak, Anbag, and Antal, are synonyms, and they all refer to a revi'it measurement of the Torah. Let's begin the next Mishnah. Hamarzev en lo chazaka v'yesh lemkomo chazaka. Hamazchila yesh la chazaka. We learned that a spout, this is a drain spout. If my neighbor has a building and the water comes off into this gutter and then out of this drain spout, and I own the land over here. So he has this drain spout coming out, and he has it coming out there and putting water in my land for 3 years. There is no chazakah, because this item here that sticks out is movable, is temporary, and therefore I don't protest, because I figure anytime I want, I can just tell him to move it, and then he would move it. So the fact that I didn't protest for 3 years is not significant, and that he does not get a chazakah for that. However, its space does have a chazakah. The Gemara will discuss what that means precisely, maybe something about the airspace that it takes up. Okay, so for this part sticking out, which is the spout, there's no chazakah. However, for the mazchila, the gutter itself is permanent. It's fixed and attached to the building, and therefore, when my neighbor builds this gutter, I should protest if I don't want it there. If I don't protest for 3 years, that means I'm okay with it, and then he acquires the right to have his gutter there. So that's the main difference between the spout, which is a temporary item and does not create a chazakah, and the gutter, which is a permanent item and therefore does create a chazakah. So let's see 2 more applications of the same principle. Sulam misri en lo chazakah v'lasuri yesh lo chazakah. An Egyptian ladder, that's a small step stool, like you use in your kitchen with just 2 or 3 steps. And so if my neighbor puts a little step stool on my land next to his house, he does not create a chazakah, because I just might not mind that he has a little step stool, since it's movable and temporary. So that's why I didn't say anything and didn't protest. So even if I don't say anything for 3 years, it doesn't mean that I'm okay giving him that right permanently, because it's a temporary structure. So he does not have a chazakah. I can tell him to take it off anytime. But a Tyrian ladder, these are big ladders, more like almost like a staircase. That's a steep staircase. So because that is fixed in place, that's a permanent type of structure. So if my neighbor puts that on the side of his building, on my land, and I don't say anything for 3 years, then he does acquire that usage right, and I can no longer tell him anything. Chalon mitzrit en lo chazaka v'lasurit yesh lo chazaka. An Egyptian window is a small window, and so if my neighbor has a little window in his building that's overlooking my yard, so since that's just small and temporary, the fact that I did not protest for 3 years is not significant, and therefore he does not have a chazakah. If I want, I can come and build right up at that window, and he cannot protest. However, if it's a big window, a Tyrian window, that's a permanent structure with a nice frame, big window, and if you put that there, I should protest if I don't want it there. If I don't protest for that permanent structure for 3 years, then he acquires the right to have that big window there, and then I can no longer block his view. What is the definition of an Egyptian window? It's so small enough that a person's head could not fit through it. That's if it's smaller than that, that's an Egyptian window. If it's big enough that a person could fit his head through, then that's already a Tyrian window and does have a chazakah. Rabbi Gemara omer, im yesh la malben, af al pi she'en rosho shel adam yachol likanes letocha, harezo chazaka. Rabbi Yehuda says a different definition. If it has a frame, a window frame, then even if it's small and a person could not fit his head through, nevertheless, that is a chazaka. So that's the difference. If it has no frame, that's just a little hole in the wall. I didn't say anything because, okay, you have a hole in the wall and you just didn't fix it yet. So, I didn't say anything about that. But if you put a window frame, that means that's an official part, a structural part of your house. And if you open that up and you're looking into my courtyard and I don't say anything, even if it's small, then that does create a chazakah. The Gemara will elaborate on this Mishnah further, but that will go on into the next daf. So we'll stop here. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.